On the morning of my 68th birthday, my son Derek sat across from me at my own kitchen table, folded his hands the way a man does when he has already made up his mind, and slid a manila envelope across the wood toward me. He did not say happy birthday. He did not pour me coffee. He just tapped the envelope twice with two fingers and said, "The room is already reserved, Dad, you just need to sign." I sat there looking at him, this boy I had worked double shifts to feed, this man I had co-signed loans for, this person whose wedding I had paid for in full, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet. Not broken, not panicked, quiet, because what Derek did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching this moment come for 3 years, and I had not been sitting still while I waited for it. Before I tell you everything that happened that day and everything that came after, I want to ask you something honestly. If the person you sacrificed the most for looked you in the eye and handed you papers to sign away your independence, your home, your name, and your remaining years, what would you do? Would you sign to keep the peace? Would you cry and beg them to reconsider? Or would you already have something ready? Keep that question close while you listen to Jack's story, because Jack had something ready. My name is Jack. I am 68 years old. I have big hands from years of physical work, a back that complains every morning, and a mind that has never once stopped paying attention to the people around me. That last part is the one that mattered most in the end. I was born the second of 4 children in a working-class household where money was tight but expectations were high. My father worked in a steel fabrication plant and my mother cleaned houses 3 days a week. Nobody in my family talked about feelings much. You worked, you provided, you stayed, and you handled things. That was the code I grew up with, and it was the code I carried into my adult life without questioning it for a very long time. I married a woman named Patricia when I was 26. Patricia was warm, funny, and smart in a way that never made you feel small. She could read a room in 10 seconds, and she always knew who the difficult person was before anyone else figured it out. We had 2 children together, Derek, who came first, and a daughter named Simone, who came 3 years later. Patricia died from a heart condition 11 years ago, and losing her was the event that rewrote everything about how I understood my own life. When she was gone, the silence in the house was a different kind of weight than I had ever carried before. I kept working because working was the only language I had ever learned for handling hard feelings. I was a mechanical contractor for 31 years. I built my own small company from a 2-man operation into a licensed firm with 12 employees at our peak. I was not wealthy, but I was stable. I was debt-free by my late 50s, and I had built a life that I was quietly proud of. I owned my home outright. I had a modest investment account. I had a pension that kicked in when I turned 65, and it was enough to live on comfortably without touching the other savings. I did not flash money around. I did not talk about what I had. I just took care of things the way I always had. Derek grew up watching me work. He had every advantage I never had. Private school for 2 years, a college education I funded almost entirely, a starter home where I covered the down payment because the bank would not give him a favorable rate alone. I did not mind any of that at the time. A father helps his children. That is what fathers do. That was what the code said. But I should have watched more carefully, not at what Derek asked for, at how he asked, and at what he said when I said yes. He never said thank you with his whole chest. It was always a half nod, a quick pivot to the next thing, a joke that moved the conversation away from the weight of what I had just given him. I told myself it was just his personality, uncomfortable with emotion, just like I used to be. But Patricia, before she passed, said something to me once that I stored in the back of my mind like a receipt you keep even when you hope you never need it. She said, "Jack, Derek takes without seeing. He does not mean harm, but he does not see you either. And a person who does not see you will always ask for more than you should give." I smiled at her when she said that, and I told her she was being a little hard on him. She smiled back, but she did not change her position. Patricia was usually right about people. She was right about this. For the first 2 years after Patricia died, Derek was present and involved. He called regularly. He came to the house for dinner. He helped me sort through some of her belongings. But somewhere around the 3rd year, the calls started spacing out. Dinners became every few months. By year 5, I was CKY to see him at holidays, and even then the visits were short, polite, and contained. He had a life. His wife, Renee, had a career. They had their own children now, my grandchildren, and the shape of their world did not include a grandfather who showed up more than occasionally. I was not resentful of the busyness. I understood that people have full lives. What I was paying attention to without fully naming it yet was the pattern of contact. Every time Derek reached out with any real energy, there was something behind it. A question about the house. A question about whether I had updated my will. A comment about how the investment account might be better managed by someone with professional credentials, and did I want him to look into that. Each individual comment was easy to explain away, but together, over years, they formed a shape. My daughter Simone lived 4 hours away, and we spoke every Sunday without fail. She visited 3 or 4 times a year, and when she visited, she did not ask about money or property. She fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, replanted the garden bed Patricia had loved, and sat with me on the back porch telling me things about her life that she actually cared about. Simone had her mother's ability to see people clearly. She had noticed the same shape I was noticing in Derek's behavior, and she had mentioned it to me twice in careful language, not wanting to create a conflict but not able to stay entirely silent. I told her both times that I was watching, and I was. When I turned 65 and the pension started, I made an appointment with an estate attorney named Margaret Holloway, a woman I had been referred to by an old business acquaintance who trusted her completely. I sat in her office for 2 hours. I told her my situation plainly. I told her about my assets, my children, my concerns about the future, and the specific pattern I had been observing. Margaret listened without interrupting. Then she asked me what outcome I was trying to protect against. I said I wanted to make sure that if I was ever vulnerable, the decisions about my life could not be made by someone who saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Margaret nodded. She had heard this before. She had heard it from older parents all over the city. She knew exactly what to do. We spent 3 sessions together building a legal structure around my estate and my future healthcare decisions that was clean, thorough, and completely controlled by me. My home was placed into a revocable living trust with specific terms attached. My investment account had named beneficiaries and conditions. My healthcare directive was written with precise language about who had authority over medical decisions and under what circumstances. Margaret explained every document to me 3 times until I could explain it back to her in my own words. I signed nothing I did not understand. Then I did something else, something quieter. I told no one. Not Derek, not Renee, not anyone in Derek's household. I told Simone because she was the executor I had named and she needed to know. But I told her in clear terms that this was not conversation material and she respected that completely. I went back to my regular life. I maintained my house, kept my accounts in order, played cards with 2 old friends on Thursday evenings, and watched the seasons change in the garden Patricia had planted. I was not lonely exactly, but I was aware of a kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being seen incorrectly by the people who are supposed to know you. The year I turned 67, Derek's interest in my life sharpened noticeably. The calls came more often. He started showing up at the house with Renee and the grandchildren for visits that felt warm on the surface but had a quality of inspection underneath them. He walked through the house commenting on things: the water heater, the roof, the layout of the stairs. He said things like, "This house is a lot to manage for one person, Dad. And, you know, a lot of older guys in situations like yours end up simplifying their life at some point. And wouldn't it be nice to be somewhere where everything is taken care of?" I listened to all of it. I responded with short, neutral answers. I did not argue. I did not show concern. I simply let him talk while I continued paying attention. Renee was quieter about it, but her eyes moved around my house the same way Derek's did. She complimented things in a way that felt like cataloging. "That is a beautiful sideboard, Jack. Is that original to the house? Where did Patricia find those lamps?" Questions that felt friendly but landed like assessments of value. At Christmas that year, Derek brought up an idea over dinner. His voice was casual, practiced in the way a voice gets when someone has rehearsed what they want to say. He said there was a continuing care community not far from where he and Renee lived. A very nice place, he said, independent living options and memory care and everything in between. He had taken a tour. He knew people who had family members there. It was the kind of place, he said, where a person like me could have everything taken care of and be close to family at the same time. I asked him one question. I said, "Did you tour that place for yourself or did you tour it for me?" There was a pause at the table. Renee looked at her plate. Derek recovered quickly and said he was just thinking about options, just being responsible, just planning ahead like any good son would. I said I appreciated that, and then I changed the subject. I called Margaret the following week and told her what was happening. She said it was not unusual. She told me to continue documenting, continue observing, and to make sure I had a clear record of my own cognitive and physical health that could not be easily disputed. She recommended I schedule a full health evaluation with my physician and request a written summary of my current condition. I did exactly that. My doctor, a thorough and honest man named Dr. Warren Chen, assessed me as sharp, mobile, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. I requested that assessment in writing, and I kept the original in a file at Margaret's office and a copy in a fireproof lockbox at my home. 3 months before my 68th birthday, Derek called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He said he wanted to talk. Not a casual talk, he said, a real conversation. Could he come over on Saturday? I said yes. Came alone without Renee. He sat at my kitchen table with a coffee mug and he began to talk in the measured voice of someone who has prepared. He said he had been concerned about me. He said the house was too big and too much. He said my social connections were limited. He said that as I got older, the risks of living alone increased. He had done research, he said. He had spoken to people. and he had found a place that he truly believed would give me a better quality of life than what I had now. I let him finish without interrupting. Then I asked him what he meant by a better quality of life. He talked about amenities and social programs and medical support on site and the peace of mind it would give him and Renee to know I was being looked after. I asked him whether he had spoken to Simone about any of this. There was the pause again. He said Simone lived far away and was not as involved in my day-to-day situation. I said that Simone spoke with me every single Sunday without exception and had visited me 4 times in the last 12 months, and that by any honest measure she was more consistently present in my life than he was. I said it simply and without sharpness. I was just correcting the record. Derek shifted in his chair. He said that was not the point. The point was my safety and my future. He said he had even spoken to the community's intake coordinator and they were very interested in a visit. He said it would just be a tour, no pressure, just to see. I said I would think about it. He left that Saturday believing he had made progress. He called me twice in the 2 weeks that followed, keeping the idea warm, adding small details, mentioning that Renee had also toured the place and found it lovely. I continued to listen and to say very little. 2 weeks before my birthday, a formal-looking envelope arrived at my house. It was from the continuing care community. Inside was a packet of information and a preliminary intake form. The covering letter referenced conversations with my family. It was addressed to me, but it read as if someone else had already initiated a process on my behalf. I took the packet to Margaret's office. She reviewed it and told me it was not legally binding in any way. I did not need to respond. But she said it told us something important about the level of active planning that was already underway in Derek's household. She advised me to be fully prepared for a more direct conversation in the near future. I told her I was ready, and I was. My birthday fell on a Saturday that year. Simone arrived Friday evening and stayed at the house. She had driven the 4 hours without being asked, and she showed up with a bag of groceries, a good bottle of wine, and the specific kind of energy that a person brings when they are making sure they are present for something important. She did not say that in words. She did not need to. I knew my daughter. We had dinner Friday evening and we talked about ordinary things. Her job, the garden, a book I was reading. At the end of the night, when the dishes were done and we were sitting in the living room, she looked at me and said, "Dad, are you okay?" I told her I was more than okay. She nodded once and did not push further. She trusted me. The morning of my birthday, Derek and Renee arrived at 9:30. They brought the grandchildren, which I was genuinely glad about. My grandchildren were good kids who had nothing to do with the adult complications happening around them. They brought a cake and a card, and the surface of the morning was pleasant. We sat in the kitchen eating cake, and the grandchildren showed me things on their tablets, and for about an hour everything felt simply like a family birthday. Then Derek asked Renee to take the children out to the backyard. She gathered them up without any fuss as if this had been planned, which it had. Derek reached into the leather bag he had brought with him and pulled out a manila envelope. He set it on the table. He folded his hands over it, and then he said those words. "The room is already reserved, Dad. You just need to sign." I looked at the envelope. I looked at my son. I noticed that he had not asked me how I was feeling on my birthday. I noticed that he had not waited even 2 full hours into my birthday morning before arriving at the real reason for the visit. I noticed that his hands were very still on the envelope, the hands of someone who has convinced himself that what he is doing is the right thing, which is sometimes the most dangerous kind of person in a room. I said, "Show me what's in there." He opened the envelope and laid out the documents. There was the continuing care agreement with my name already typed on the applicant line. There was a page that outlined a financial arrangement that would involve converting a significant portion of my assets to fund the placement. There was a document that would have transferred power of attorney for financial decisions to Derek. There was another document related to healthcare decisions. The pile was thorough. Someone had worked on this. I read each page slowly. Derek sat quietly. He made a small comment about how the attorney who prepared the documents had explained everything clearly and there was nothing to worry about. He said the room had a nice view and was on the 2nd floor and they had a garden program he thought I would enjoy. I set the last page down. I looked at him. I said, "Derek, who told you I needed any of this?" He said he was my son and it was his responsibility to look after me. I said, "And who determined that I was not already looking after myself?" He started to speak about the risks of aging alone, the complexity of managing a home, the importance of having medical support nearby. He had clearly rehearsed this section. He spoke for several minutes. When he finished, I said, "I would like you to listen to me now." I stood up. I went to the desk in the corner of the kitchen where I had placed a folder the night before, after Simone and I finished our wine and she went to bed. I came back to the table and I sat down and I opened the folder. I said 3 years ago I met with an estate attorney. I placed my home in a revocable living trust with conditions that I wrote and that I control. The beneficiaries of my estate have been designated in a way that reflects how people have actually shown up in my life, not just how they are related to me by blood. My healthcare directive has named Simone as my healthcare proxy, and she has written authorization to make decisions on my behalf if, and only if two independent physicians certify that I am no longer able to make them myself. My financial power of attorney has not been assigned to anyone because I am fully capable of managing my own financial affairs, as confirmed in writing by my physician 3 months ago. I pulled out Dr. Chen's written assessment and laid it on the table next to Derek's documents. I said I have a clean bill of cognitive and physical health. I manage this house, these accounts, and my daily life without assistance or confusion. I have been doing so for years and I intend to continue. Derek was very quiet. His hands had come off the envelope. I said the documents you brought are not something I am going to sign. Not today, not next month. Not because someone pressures me to. If I ever choose to move to a community living situation, that will be a decision I make with my full faculties and on my own timeline. It will not be a decision made by my son on my birthday before I have finished my cake. There was a very long silence, the kind that fills up with everything that has not been said for years. Derek said he was only trying to help. I said I knew that was what he was telling himself. I said I also knew that helpfulness that does not ask what the other person actually wants is just control wearing a friendly coat. I did not say this with anger. I said it the way a person says something true that has been waiting a long time to be spoken. Derek's face went through several things at once. Surprise, hurt, the beginning of defensiveness, and underneath all of that, something that looked briefly like shame. He said he did not realize I had done all of this. I said that was the thing he might want to sit with. He had not realized. He had come here today to my birthday with papers he had arranged without asking me. He had assumed that I had not prepared, had not thought ahead, had not made my own arrangements. He had assumed, I said, that I was waiting around to be managed. I said I have spent 40 years being the person who handled things. I did not stop doing that just because I got older. Renee came back inside at that moment with the children. She looked at the two of us at the table and read the room in about 3 seconds. She quietly redirected the grandchildren to the living room. Derek sat with his hands on the table and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he picked up the documents from the continuing care community and slowly put them back in the envelope. He did not look at me when he did it. He put the envelope in his bag. He said he was sorry. I told him sorry had a lot of work to do and I was glad he had started it. We did not talk about the documents again that day. The birthday continued. Cake was eaten. The grandchildren were loud in good ways, but something had shifted permanently in the air of that kitchen and all the adults in the house could feel it. After Derek and Renee and the grandchildren left late that afternoon, Simone and I sat on the back porch. She had stayed quiet through the whole thing, as I had asked her to do when I briefed her Friday evening. She had been present, but she had let me handle it alone, which was exactly right. She said, "Dad, how do you feel?" I thought about it. I said I felt like a man who had been carrying a careful thing for a long time and had finally been able to set it down in the right place. She laughed a little and then she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Mom would be proud of you." I said I hoped so. I thought of Patricia and what she had told me about Derek years ago. She had seen what was coming before I was ready to see it clearly. I had caught up eventually. That was the best I could say for myself. In the weeks that followed, Derek called twice. Both calls were short and careful. He was clearly working through something and he was not yet ready to have the real conversation, the one behind the birthday, the one about what had actually been happening between us for years. I was patient. I was not angry. But I was also not going to pretend that nothing had happened or that the documents on my kitchen table had been a misunderstanding. Simone spoke to him once during this period and called me after. She said he was embarrassed. She said Renee had apparently been the primary driver of the care community idea and that Derek had convinced himself it was the loving and responsible thing to do. Simone did not say this to excuse him. She said it because it was true and because the fuller truth was that Derek had let himself be steered without checking with me, without asking what I wanted, without treating me as someone whose opinion about my own life was the most important one in the room. I thought about that for a while. I thought about how easy it is to let someone else's certainty replace your own judgment. Renee was not a bad person. She was a practical person who had looked at an aging father-in-law with a house and assets and had done the math in a way that she thought was sensible. She had not factored in the part where I was a full person with my own plans and my own will. That was the mistake. A common mistake I had come to understand, more common than most families like to admit. About 6 weeks after my birthday, Derek asked if he could come visit. He came on a Sunday afternoon. He came alone without Renee, which told me something about what he intended. He sat at the kitchen table again. Different energy this time, no envelope. He said he had been thinking a lot. He said he owed me more than an apology, that he owed me an explanation, and that the explanation did not reflect well on him. He talked for about 15 minutes without interruption. He talked about the financial pressure he and Renee had been feeling over the past couple of years, a business investment that had gone badly, debt that was larger than he had told anyone. He talked about the house I owned and the investments, and how the math of his situation had started to bleed into the math of my situation in his mind. He said he had told himself it was about my welfare because that was easier than admitting what it was actually about. He could not quite say it fully, so I said it for him. I said you needed access to my assets and this was the path that seemed possible. He looked at the table, he said yes. I sat with that for a moment. It was not pleasant to hear, but it was necessary. A lie held between two people takes up enormous space. This particular lie had been sitting between Derek and me for more than a year, possibly longer. Hearing it named out loud made the air in the kitchen cleaner. I said thank you for telling me that directly, I mean it. He looked up. I said I am not going to bail you out of the debt, not because I do not love you, but because I learned something from 40 years of work, which is that money that solves a problem without addressing the behavior that created the problem does not actually solve anything. It just delays the next version of the same problem. He was quiet. I said what I will do is help you find a path through, not with my money, with my experience. I have navigated financial trouble before. I know people. I know how these situations can be approached honestly. If you want that help, it is available. But it comes with the condition that we deal with each other honestly from now on. That means you do not make decisions about my life without talking to me first. That means when you need something, you ask me directly instead of building a plan around me. That means Renee and I have one direct conversation, not through you, so that she understands clearly where things stand. Do you agree to those conditions? He said yes. He said it quietly, but he said it without looking away. I said good, let's start on Sunday, bring Renee. That conversation happened. It was difficult in the beginning. Renee was embarrassed in a way that made her defensive at first, and I let her have that for a few minutes before I spoke. I told her I was not there to humiliate anyone. I was there to set a new foundation. I told her plainly what I had told Derek, that my home and my assets were mine, that I had made provisions, that neither pressure nor paperwork would change those provisions, and that this was not a conversation I intended to have again. But I also told her that family was family, and if she and Derek were willing to operate honestly, I was willing to help them navigate what they were going through. She cried. I had not expected that. She said she had not thought about how it would feel from my side. I said that was exactly the problem and that it was also fixable if she was willing. She was. Over the next several months, I helped Derek restructure his situation. I did not give him money. I connected him with a financial advisor I trusted, helped him understand his options clearly, and sat with him through two difficult conversations with creditors that he had been avoiding because avoidance was his default response to financial stress. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had learned to avoid hard things and had found himself in a hole because of it. The same way I had once avoided the hard conversation about what Patricia had seen in him. We were, in some ways, teaching each other the same lesson from different directions. The care community paperwork was never mentioned again. The manila envelope disappeared. The intake coordinator from that facility had sent one follow-up letter that I returned unopened with a brief note that my situation had not changed and my family would not be pursuing placement at this time. My relationship with Derek changed after all of this, not dramatically on the surface. We still had dinner at holidays. The grandchildren still came to my backyard in summer, but the quality of the time was different. There was less performance in it, less management. Derek started calling me on Thursday evenings not because something was at stake, but because he was talking to his father. Those calls were shorter than the big produced visits he used to arrange, but they were more real. I preferred them considerably. Simone remained exactly who she had always been. She still called on Sundays. She still visited and fixed things and sat on the porch. I told her the full story of the Sunday meeting with Derek and Renee, and she listened without judgment and then said, "You did that with grace, Dad." I said I had had a good example to follow. She knew I meant her mother. My 69th birthday came the following year. Derek called the night before and asked if they could come. I said yes. They arrived in the morning, and this time Derek walked in with a bag from the bakery and a handshake that turned into a brief hug that neither of us commented on. Renee brought flowers from their garden. The grandchildren gave me a card they had made themselves. My name was spelled wrong on it by the youngest one, and I saved it. We sat around the kitchen table and we ate pastries, and nobody produced an envelope. There was nothing on the table except breakfast food and coffee and the handmade card with my name spelled wrong. It was a simple birthday. It was the best one I had in many years. I sat at that table on my 69th birthday and I thought about the version of myself that might have signed those papers a year ago. The version that might have wanted to keep the peace badly enough to hand over his own life to do it. The version that had not been paying attention, had not made the appointments, had not built the legal structure, had not stayed quiet and watchful while staying thoroughly prepared. That version of me would have lost everything, not all at once, quietly by degrees, the house first, then the accounts, then the choices, then the mornings. That version of me would have ended up in a room reserved by someone else, in a building picked by someone else, on a timeline decided by someone else, and would have spent his final years wondering how it had happened so smoothly. But that was not the version of Jack who had sat at this table on his 68th birthday. This version had watched and prepared and stayed calm and spoken the truth clearly when the moment came. This version had protected himself not with anger or revenge, not with cruelty or legal warfare, but with the one thing that no one had counted on him having: his own documentation, his own plans, and his own clear, deliberate voice. I have thought since then about what I would tell a man in a similar position. Not a man who is already in crisis, but a man who can feel something building, who notices the shape of a pattern before it has fully arrived. I would tell him this. Pay attention to the space between what people say and what they actually do. Pay attention to who calls you when there is nothing to be gained. Pay attention to who treats your preferences as relevant and who treats them as an obstacle. Build your legal protections while you are calm and clear, not while you are panicked and pressured. Tell the people who need to know. Tell no one else. And when the moment comes, as it came for me on a Saturday birthday morning, do not sign anything you did not write. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not threaten. It does not perform. It simply sits at the kitchen table on a birthday morning and reads every page carefully and then sets the papers down and speaks. That strength is available to anyone who builds it before they need it. I built mine, and on the morning that mattered most, I was ready. The garden Patricia planted still grows in the backyard. I tend it every spring. The porch where Simone and I sit on her visits is the same porch where Patricia and I used to watch the sun go down 30 years ago. The kitchen table has a small scratch near one edge that happened when Derek was 12 and dropped a tool he was not supposed to be playing with, and I never fixed it because I liked remembering that he was once a boy who did ordinary careless things that were easy to forgive. I am 69 years old. I still walk every morning. I still play cards on Thursdays. I still sleep in the house I own, in the bed I choose, under the roof I maintained, and I wake up each day and I decide what happens next. Nobody reserves a room for Jack without asking Jack first. That is the whole of it. But I want to be honest with you about something before I finish this story completely, because honesty is the only thing I have ever trusted to hold weight over time. The months after my birthday were not simple. Derek's financial situation was worse than I had understood from his initial admission. There were creditors I had not known about. There was a second investment that had gone wrong in a way that left him exposed. Renee, who worked in real estate sales, had seen her commissions fall sharply in a slow market. Together they were in a real and pressing bind. And while I had said clearly that I would not fund their solution, I had also said I would help them find a path. I kept that promise. It required more of my time and attention than I had expected. I spent 4 Saturdays sitting across from Derek in the office of the financial advisor I had connected him to, listening to hard conversations about debt restructuring, asset liquidation of things they owned rather than things I owned, and a budget that was genuinely uncomfortable but survivable. Derek was humbled by these sessions in a way that I did not take any pleasure in. Seeing your adult child embarrassed and afraid is not satisfying, it is just difficult. But something happened in those 4 Saturdays that was worth more than any financial number we worked through. Derek started talking to me differently, not performing care or responsibility, just talking. He told me things about the pressure he had felt for years to appear successful, the way his image of himself was tied to financial growth in a way that had made him vulnerable to bad decisions. He talked about Renee's family, where the appearance of security was treated as a moral quality, and how their combined ambitions had outrun their judgment. I did not lecture him. I had nothing left to prove in that direction. I just listened. And occasionally I said something true. Sometimes that was enough. By the time those 4 Saturdays were over, Derek and Renee had a plan that was honest, manageable, and entirely their own. I had helped them see it clearly. The actual execution was theirs. I watched them take responsibility for their situation in a way that I was genuinely glad to see. People can surprise you, even people who have disappointed you. That is a fact worth remembering. Renee called me on a Wednesday about 3 months after those sessions. She said she wanted to say something and she wanted to say it clearly without Derek present because she wanted me to know it came directly from her. She said she was sorry. She said she had looked at me as a resource before she had looked at me as a person, and that she was aware of how damaging that was and how it had shaped the plan that had arrived at my kitchen table on my birthday. She said she did not expect the apology to fix anything. She just needed me to hear it from her directly. I said I heard it, and I said I accepted it, not as permission to forget it happened, but as a beginning of something more honest between us. I told her that I hoped from this point forward she would feel comfortable coming to me directly about anything that concerned her or Derek, rather than building solutions around me. She said she would. That call lasted 12 minutes. It was a significant 12 minutes. There is one more thing I want to tell you about the period after my birthday, because it involves something I have not mentioned yet, and it matters to the full shape of what happened. About 4 months after the birthday, I received a call from the continuing care community that Derek had arranged. Not about me. The intake coordinator had apparently tried to follow up with Derek about the pending application, and Derek, to his credit, had told her directly that the application was withdrawn and that I was not interested. But the coordinator, being thorough, called me personally to confirm. I confirmed it. I thanked her for her diligence. And then I asked her one question out of genuine curiosity. I said, in your experience, how often do families initiate the intake process without the older adult's full knowledge or agreement? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, more often than people realize, much more often. And she said that the facilities that operated with genuine ethics tried to put safeguards in place, required direct conversations with the potential resident, required written confirmation of the person's own interest. But not all facilities operated that way, and not all families started the conversation honestly. I thanked her again and ended the call. I sat with that answer for a little while, not with anger, with the kind of heavy clarity that comes when you understand that the thing that happened to you is not an isolated event, but a pattern that happens to many people who are simply less prepared than you were. I thought about the older men and women who do not have a Margaret Holloway in their corner, who have not made the appointments, who have signed the papers because the room was already reserved and they did not know they had a choice. I thought about how quietly that process can unfold, how much it can be wrapped in language about safety and love and practicality, until a person hands over their own life before they have understood what they were signing. That thought stayed with me. I am not a policy person, I am not a lawyer. I cannot change the systems that allow this to happen, but I am a man who has learned something worth passing along. The protection is available, the legal tools exist, the documents can be written, the appointments can be made, the clarity can be built before the pressure arrives. And the difference between having done it and not having done it is the difference between sitting at your own kitchen table on your birthday with your own plans in a folder and being handed someone else's plan in an envelope. Build your folder. Make your appointments. Tell your Simone. And do not sign anything you did not write. That is what I know, that is what I lived, that is Jack's story. Before you move on, I want to ask you something worth thinking about. Jack spent years watching quietly, preparing carefully, and refusing to let being loved and being managed become the same thing. He never once had to raise his voice. He never had to humiliate anyone. He just had his folder and his truth and his calmness, and that was more than enough. If you have someone in your life who is getting older, ask yourself honestly whether you are seeing them or managing them. And if you are the one getting older, I want to ask you directly, have you built your folder yet? Drop a comment below and tell me whether Jack did the right thing, whether you have ever been in a situation like this on either side of the table. This channel is about people who stayed quiet for too long and then found their voice at exactly the right moment. Jack is one of those people. If his story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you are subscribed because Jack's story is far from over.